Good evening and welcome. I'm Karen Provenza with Napa Bookmine. Our authors tonight wish to begin with a land acknowledgement. Patricia?
Okay, we're going to start with a quote. This is from Greg Saras Pomo, and it is an excerpt from a response to a public apology for the mission system. This is from News for Native America, or summer 2008. The landscape, which was a sacred text, pages and pages of rocks and creeks, hillsides, sacred springs, plants and animals that told us everywhere we looked that we were home, has been reduced, obliterated to all but a few shards. We must, all of us together, each with our own lives and history, restore the landscape so that together we are home.
So we'll just add a few words to that. And I would like to I'm trying to find new ways to do a land acknowledgement so they don't sound like something done by rote. So can we just spend a moment, maybe close your eyes if you want, and take a few deep breaths. If you are on land in Napa, imagine yourself really touching the land. Take a couple of breaths. If you're on land in some other place, bring your attention to that land. That's my door knocking. Take some deep breaths. And imagine what that land was like in early days before colonization. What were the trees like then? What were the grasses like? The wild animals and the people there. Imagine yourself in connection with those people and thank them if you can for taking such wonderful care of that land in their time. And now back into your own time, into our own time, remembering that experience, offering gratitude and acknowledgement for being on the land. In this case, I'm on the land because I'm in Oakland tonight. I'm on the land of the Lishan Ohlone people, and I actually pay a generosity tax to them, and they are regaining parts of their land. They have a large organization that's able to take land back and care for it. And I speak also for the land in Napa with gratitude to the Mishual Onestatis people, whom most of us have called the Wapo, and who are known as the Wapo also. And with gratitude to them for the care that they've given to this land over millennia, and acknowledgement of the fact that it was never given away or sold. We'll learn more about that tonight. So thank you, and may this grow. I'm done.
Thank you. Well, now I'm thrilled to introduce our authors tonight. Both have inspired me to think deeply about our valley. Patricia, with her books, Fruits of Eden, Field Notes, Napa Valley, 1991 to 2021, has awakened me to the immediate need to protect our cherished watershed and oaks that thrive in our savanna. And Louise, with Inherited Silence, Listening to the Land, Healing the Colonizer Mind, has opened my eyes to the atrocities in our history, the truth behind how we have come to thrive on this land that was violently stolen from its original people. Here's a little bit more about these remarkable women before you get to hear more directly from them. Patricia Damery is a writer and retired Jungian psychoanalyst. For many years, she and her husband, Donald Harms, farmed biodynamic and organic lavender and grapes. She currently is a board member of the activist group Napa Vision 2050 and co-editor of its newsletter, Eyes on Napa. She served on the executive committee of the Napa Sierra Club and has been an active participant on the Sierra Club Redwood Chapter's Northern California Forest Committee Oak Working Group. Louise Dunlap is a writer, retired university teacher, Buddhist meditator, earth lover, and sixth-generation Californian descendant from Napa's founder, Nathan Koontz. That has to settle over me a minute. Although she lived in Napa for only 2 years in her early childhood, she has a lifetime connection to the land her ancestors purchased during a period she's come to understand as a time of genocide. For 30 years, she helped tend to part of that land that was passed down to her family. To both of you, what led you to write your book, and what did you learn through that experience? Who wants to go first?
Well, I would go first just to break the ice, and because my bio pretty much did it for me. I began to write the book probably 20 years ago, because I do love this piece of land that my family had passed down. I want to say at the very beginning of this evening that it's no longer in our family. So I need to use the past tense, but it's not past tense for me. It's very present. My feelings about the land are still very strong. So it had been part of my life for such a long time, and there I was, a caretaker of it, and wanting to, I'd always loved botany and plants, and wanting to know and record and celebrate its history as land. But at the same time, I knew I needed to look into the history of my ancestors, which I knew very little about, because I knew from my other readings and activities in the world, I knew that what had happened to turn the land over to the Anglos and other settlers here was violent, and I wanted to know how my ancestors were involved. So that was why I wrote the book. And am I supposed to answer the other question too? Yes, of what I learned from that. Yeah, so it was a real learning journey, a long one, because it wasn't easy to find out these stories. I had to do a lot of reading of old books. I see a cousin online who has a garage with a lot of old letters in it. I was able to look at those letters. And I actually, not from the letters, but from the books, I learned that it really is important to be able to use the word genocide for what happened here in Napa. It was something I thought might be an exaggeration when I started out, but I was completely wrong about that. So that was one thing I learned. I also learned that the genocide and brutality to Native people went right alongside of the same kinds of brutality to the earth that led us in this culture to climate change. And that became very clear to me as I worked just on looked just into the Napa Valley, not to mention the rest of the world that has been colonized. I learned that the mind of the colonizer was still in myself. There's some people on this call that know that I can be arrogant and think I know the right answer. And that's only part of it. And it's something I think all of us share without knowing. And I also learned that we can do something about this, we can work on this and we can change this part of our mind. And hopefully if we can change our own mindsets, we can change some of the results of those. So that's my answer. Thank you for asking.
Patricia? Same
I'm
thing.
sorry, our power. Okay,
Oh, I can see you.
I'm
You're in the dark.
Oh, really?
I'm in the dark and I've got my hotspot going. And I hope this works for a while. This is outrageous. Even everything in this area appears to be off because I was going to go down to my son's house, but that's not working. But so the question,
Yes.
what led you to write the book? I'll tell you, I don't know that my sister Judy is on this, but she would call this a California moment. But so just frame it with that. But my husband and I farmed biodynamically. He was here from the early 80s. He and I were married and we got together in the early 90s. And every day I walk the ranch. With Donald, with the goats, with our dogs. And I really came to become very intimately familiar with all of the plants. I write about that some in the book. And one of the areas of the ranch that I particularly have been drawn to and really stunned by from the first time I was in this area was this beautiful ancient oak savanna. The oaks are at least 300 years old. And it's rare, you know, where 98% of our valley oaks have been cut in the Napa Valley. These are still surviving. And so we had a neighbor who lived next to us, and he also loved this oak savanna and the valley oaks in it. And we put an easement on it, which we thought would protect it into perpetuity. However, in 2008 was the economic downturn, and he had to sell his land. And it turned out the new buyers wanted to plant a vineyard in this protected savanna. And they saw nothing, there's no conflict with plowing an oak savanna and putting in vines and build an event center. And when I learned about this, when I would walk, my feet ached, they hurt. So this is a California moment. I went to a healer that I've gone to I've taken my husband, I took my kids, I took our goats. He told me after that I didn't need to bring the goats in person, he would do it long distance. But anyway, he worked on me. And he said to me, and my feet, and at the end of it, he said, the oak savanna and the trees don't have a voice. You have a voice, and the land needs you to use your voice for it. And that was the beginning for me. That was when I sought out our neighbors. One of the things that I learned from this is how important neighbors are. We worked together on it and got some modifications. I met other groups that were citizen groups that were also working for the environment and really was mentored in how do you work with county government. And so that was the beginning. I also wrote the way I heal through writing. But ironically, or not ironically, after that, my feet no longer hurt when I walk. So there was healing for me in beginning to write. I think that another learning was how important our communities are. Before, many of my closest contacts were colleagues in San Francisco, Marin, Sonoma County, and to really get to know people in Napa and come to love them was really one of those silver linings of this cloud that we were having to work with. It looks like PG&E is calling me. I hope it's not bothering. But anyway,
Yeah, we're not hearing it.
yeah. So that's my story.
Well, the two books are such a wonderful companion to one another. They both focus on our valley, but bring into focus some very different challenges that we have with our land and living here. How was it for the two of you to read one another's work? Louise, why don't you chime in first with that? How was that for you?
Well, it was so wonderful. I think something both of us have left out of our why we wrote the book, but it was very important to, I think, both of us, is the era that we're living in right now. The onset of not just extreme weather, but an understanding that our climate is really changing radically. And there's so many feelings associated with this. And it's a theme that is there throughout both of the books. And I was just felt so comforted to know that another person on the other side of the valley was thinking the same thoughts and taking action in such remarkable ways as this book brings out. I hope people are able to read the many letters to the editor that Patricia wrote. Maybe you've already read them if you're in Napa, but I learned a side of the colonizer mind as it is alive today in the Napa Valley that I didn't have time to follow through on myself. So I got a chance through this book to go to endless Board of Supervisors meetings and to go to a lot of wonderful programs and conferences where I learned about what does tourism do to change the dynamics of a region. Things that we have to be, I'm just remarkably touched by all the ways that Patricia brings in the systemic larger picture of what is happening to endanger the earth and the Napa Valley right now around us. And these are things we can do something about because they are in our time frame. So that was one thing. Let's see, I made a few notes here. Oh yeah. I was really grateful to realize I had done a lot of looking for other ways of thinking, other consciousness, other ways of thinking through looking at indigenous teachings about the earth, about each other, about technology. And I was glad to learn in this book that there were a lot of European thinkers who brought the idea of reciprocity with the earth into their thinking. Jung, Rudolf Steiner, Goethe, and some people living up in the Outer Hebrides who don't own their land anymore. They put it all in land trusts. So it's not like Europeans are necessarily the 100% bad guys. There were lots of important thinking that we need to reach back and reconnect with if we're going to look for new ways of understanding how to live in this world right now. And throughout the book, there was a theme that I noticed, which I will express as the other side is not your enemy. So there is Patricia and there are her colleagues going to these meetings, which I've been to a few of, and they are very difficult because it sometimes seems like the other side is your enemy. And yet we know that's not the way to find common ground and solutions. And it's so being able to work with this non-duality, as we call it in Buddhism. In my book, I had to work with my ancestors in that regard, try to learn how to look at things you don't agree with without hatred, and actually with love, and to find common ground. So that is something I'm thinking that we need to do going forward in the world very, very much. And I found that in this book. And I'm really grateful for that. And it's an ongoing struggle for me and everybody in the book. And nobody's very good at it yet. And we have to get better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I found.
Patricia, when you read Inherited Silence, what was your feeling and takeaway?
Well, I read Inherited Silence on the train coming across the United States. And it was, so we were moving through all of these lands that have been profoundly impacted, passing train cars, 2 football fields long, full of coal. And so reading Inherited Silence was quite an experience. It really, for me, it's very difficult to know. I feel like most of us have a broad brushstroke of what happened, and we don't want to think about it very much because where we're living was taken. But Louise unflinchingly tells us what happened in her family. And then what was also interesting, you move on and then she goes to the Mayflower. Well, my relatives supposedly were on the Mayflower too. They probably knew each other. And they came over and immediately got started in this rather hideous relationship. And yet Louise had so much empathy and worked to have empathy for why that might be true. And I think one of the really profound things for me in it is tracing it back. She goes back on property rights, back to the 15th century doctrine of Christian discovery, which basically the Pope said, to the explorers, you can take land of non-Christians. They say this to the explorers. And I think that it goes, so we get into that dichotomy and she really drills down into this. I learned a lot from reading the book about what does it mean? Do we own land or do we belong to the land? And the difference of those two. And it makes a big difference about how we treat the land. I think that direct connection, again, underscoring when we come to land in the way we did, it has impacted how we treat the trees, the watersheds, how our government treats it. It's institutionalized. And the direct result, what's happened now, the climate crisis is the direct result of that. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to be much worse. We're in for it. That's one thing we know. We know we're going to have crisis after crisis. We're in a new time where we're going to have to learn to live with trauma. But what we need to do is survive. And so anyway, here I am. I'm going off on this. I get passionate about it. Survive. But I think I really, the way that Louise develops that was very helpful to me. It helps me understand my own experience with the land, and both in terms of owning it and belonging to it. I think we all have both. Anyway,
Mm.
Yes, those are common themes in both of your books.
Yeah.
Both our authors tonight have selected passages to read. Anyone? Patricia, why don't you start us off with what you've selected before your lights go out completely?
read it by candlelight.
We want to hear what you say before you disappear.
Okay.
You're there.
I'm going to read two excerpts, and the first one is from the introduction, Fire, Water, and Climate, What Unites Us? And those of you from Napa will recognize this. As the sun set, the winds rose. Like demon's breath, the air was slick and hot. The goats' hooves gouged the ground as I corralled them into their barn. Although the National Weather Service had issued warnings of high fire danger, I was focused on our upcoming trip to Portugal the next day. When I opened the bedroom window to the east, I noticed a plume of deep crimson smoke, striated in orange, mushrooming into billowing blackness on the ridge across the valley. I called Donald, who was watching TV. By the time he came to the window, the fire had spread south, outlining the ridge top. Within minutes, golden flames flowed like lava down the entire eastern ridge. Within the next hour, the western sky behind us reddened with a second of 3 fires started that night. What was happening? Panicked, we led the bucking goats and llama down our 3/4-mile driveway to the pickup of a friend, waiting to transport them to an animal evacuation center. We gathered our dog and ourselves and followed the pickup into the hopeful safety of town. Before we left, I wandered through the house we had built together, grabbing a few items and saying goodbye to our home. That first night, the Atlas Peak fire in Napa County burned 6 people alive. Helicopters airlifted people trapped at the end of the 6-mile dead-end Soda Canyon Road, a road that is the focus of the contentious permitting of Mountain Peak Winery. Of the 163 residences on the road, 82% of them burned over the next days. 72% were completely devoured. And for those of you who don't know, this has been a huge issue, Mountain Peak Winery and the permitting of it in this very unsafe place. 3 fires, which all began that night, burned 6,300 homes in Napa and Sonoma counties, killing 29 people. Until the next year, when wildfire wiped out the town of Paradise, California, these fires would be declared the biggest and deadliest wildfire in California history. This is a love story for my husband's and my beloved ranch, upon which we have farmed grapes and lavender for almost 40 years, now threatened by a neighbor's proposed winery event center. For my husband, as he sinks into the fog of dementia, and for those individuals whom I've come to know well through this advocacy. Their friendships are the diamonds formed through chaos, greed, and ignorance of these times. It is also the inside story of a group of citizens working to awaken local county government to the challenges of our changing climate and to the need for action that ensures resiliency. Since the 1976 Paris blind tasting, which put Napa Valley wines on the map, the wine industry's success has also led to the county's greatest challenges. The county had the foresight in 1968 to form the first ever zoning designation of agricultural preserve, limiting development in our rural valley lands. A few years later, the hillsides were legally protected by zoning designation agricultural watershed. Through the years, some in the wine industry have systemically eroded these protections. No, wait a minute, I'm skipping this. This is the David and Goliath story of citizen groups challenging significant corporate and wealthy interests to bring balance between agriculture and our wildlands, between the aspirations of moneyed interests for their visions of wineries and vineyards, and of those of workers and community residents for living wages, affordable housing, clean air and water, and health. Because of human actions, we are experiencing the beginnings of unprecedented climate disruption. It will take human action if we are to survive. To meet these challenges, we are being called to develop our relationships with each other and with the planet. This is, after all, a crisis of consciousness. I take the Dalai Lama's words as my guiding star. It's probably been many lifetimes since we have had such an auspicious conjunction of conditions favorable to progress along the path of higher being. End of quote. It's a rather positive framing. The path of conscious activism offers that opportunity. And then I want to read an excerpt. We have really had some wonderful now ancestors of land use ancestors. So I'm going to read a portion in the chapter called What We Know Now. Two of our land use visionaries, Volker Isley and Dwayne Cronk, held that stewardship of Napa County lands is better left to the voters than to the elected officials. At the time, the winery definition ordinance was being authored and its EIR reviewed. Volker and Dwayne, concerned for the fate of agricultural protections after the 1988 supervisory elections, authored and passed a citizens initiative, Measure J, ensuring the ag preserve would last for another 30 years. Measure J, this is a quote, Measure J won in the polls despite all the opposition. What the supervisors who were against us misjudged was that the people of Napa County, when you measured their opinions, were 2/3 in favor of good land use. The voters wanted protection, end of quote, in this Volker. This protection was extended another 50 years through a second initiative. What we know now is that only when citizens stay on board and go to Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings and vote, and when necessary, use the tool of the citizen initiative, that the common good, which includes the environment, is served. It's a lot of work and it's easy to weary from it. In an interview shortly before his death, Volker Isley, named the Lion of Land Use, stated that one day he would not be going to Planning Commission meetings and making phone calls, that he would rather be going to the opera. But to my knowledge, he continued his land use work until his death in 2015. As he warned Mike Hackett, co-author of the Watershed Initiatives, the hillsides would be the next fight, again showing his prescience in land use matters. One of my favorite stories about Volker tells of his entry into politics when his own ranch was threatened by a proposed motorcycle park nearby. Not only did he organize neighbors and make public comment at the Planning Commission meetings where the park lost 5-1, and when it was appealed to the Board of Supervisors, lost 4-1, he also insisted on code enforcement, which we all know is a huge problem in Napa County. The Saturday after the park was voted down by the Board of Supervisors, the motorcycles were back at the park. When the county insisted there was no evidence of this, Volker's wife climbed a tree bearing a 4-by-8-foot sign for the park, ripped it down, and Volker drove the sign to the county administration building, placing it on county council's desk. "Here's your evidence," he said. He left a legacy. Sandy Ells, executive director of the Farm Bureau at the time, said, and this is a quote, "He taught me more than anything else to enjoy what you do. If you live life to the fullest, you will succeed and you will leave a legacy." That's the end of quote. This is critically important in these activism issues, to enjoy the ride, because it's going to be a long one. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that was a takeaway for me, was how long you've been fighting the battles and how many meetings you have to attend to make a difference.
I
It's
know,
pretty staggering.
it is.
Louise is going to read as well, but for the people on the call tonight, feel free to either start putting your questions in chat or get ready to phrase them yourselves. And after Louise reads, we'll have a chance for you to ask your questions. And if we need to go a little bit longer to make that happen, we can. So, Louise.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm going to start with I'm going to read 4 shorter pieces. And the first one is from the very first chapter of the book, because I too began with the fires. So this is just the first chapter, first paragraph of that. In the fall of 2017, an environmental disaster brewing for nearly 200 years came to life at night, late at night, in the dry hills around California's Napa Valley. My family had been among the first Anglo settlers in this beautiful place, and I was just finishing a 10-year study of the land they'd passed down and the history they'd never told us. I was in the city that night and didn't know about the Napa fires until I choked on their smoke the next morning, 50 miles to the south. The whole chapter, the whole opening chapter is about the fires and the wake-up call of the fires. So I'm going to skip ahead because I think most of you know that are based in Napa know that story even better than I do. I'm going to read most of my chapters start with a passage that I think of as listening to the land. And this is from the chapter 5, called, that's about my father and the oak trees on the land. Our house stands in a dramatic grove of California coastal live oak, some with trunks 4 feet across. Branching from the base, they reach their long, thick limbs for sunlight, parallel to the earth. The land is open at their feet, but far above, a weaving of great dark limbs supports a leafy canopy. Bird life thrives up there, and buoyant-tailed western gray squirrels dart up one sloping branch and down the next, rushing to earth with acorns to bury in the blanket of fallen leaves. Everyone who comes remarks on these huge trees, usually with awe. In the dry, hot summer, they cool the air, and their shade is sanctuary. They host an endlessly fascinating ecosystem. For humans, it's peaceful and quiet under their great limbs, and the earth is alive. How did these big trees come to be growing so harmoniously beside the small open field Mother had tried to restore? Some were over 100 years old when the first Europeans came into the valley. I imagine them back then on cool, foggy mornings when the grass underfoot was dry but not too dry, and the winds were quiet, plenty of humidity in the air. People from a village along the Napa River might be here for ceremony to renew the land, offering prayer in the Wapo language as men and women light and tend small flames that burn quickly along the ground, consuming young oak, toyon, and other saplings that have grown up since the last burning. The people know how to manage fire. Flames wrap themselves around the massive trunks of larger trees, scorching dry mosses without harming the bark, which for live oaks is extremely fire resistant. Tendrils of smoke curl up through the branches, mingling with the morning fog, soon pierced by rays of light as mid-morning sun breaks through. Small flames lick their way through the bunch grasses in the field, leaving ash to fertilize the soil. Imagine a smoky smell that feels like healing, not danger. A whole relationship with fire my culture has lost, known only from old stories and the tribes further north who still practice this way of protecting the earth from imbalance, disease, and catastrophic wildfire. And now I'm turning back to the chapter that, as I was writing it, I nicknamed the Genocide Chapter, where I try to put together all the research I could do about what really happened to the first people around the Napa Valley. And I'm not going to tell any of the specific stories right now because this is not the right setting for that. These are very painful stories. We need to be in an intimate setting, probably not on Zoom, but if on Zoom, with precautions and care. So I'm going to just read one paragraph that comes near the end, in which I also speak about the way the word ecocide comes right alongside of genocide. The earth itself was harmed, and the people went through that loss of their ecosystem as well as their own losses. It's not the right paragraph. I got the wrong one. Thank goodness I didn't. Just take a moment. Yes, here we go. For Indigenous people in California, the network of plant and animal species they had evolved with lost its coherence in a single lifetime. Species that were like relatives to them went extinct: elk, antelope, and more. Alien cattle and pigs trampled their gardens of edible bulbs and seeds and devoured their acorn crops. Invasive plants took over. The very shape of the land was changed by plowing, damming, and dredging. Cultural practices like burning to clear brush or enhance an acorn harvest became criminal acts. Food sources were fenced off with barbed wire. Water and air grew toxic. Diseases from other parts of the world ran rampant, reminding us of our dilemmas today with the pandemic. Diseases from other parts of the world ran rampant, killing as much as 90% of a community at once. Trusted medicines no longer worked. Community leaders and healers died like everyone else, leaving just a few people to carry on in a world that had fallen apart. Alongside that destruction had come mass slaughter, kidnapping, rape, enslavement, separation of children from parents, children who would be raised as servants by settler families or sent to boarding schools guided by the saying, "Kill the Indian, save the man." And now I'm going to go to another short paragraph in my final chapter, which is called, the chapter is called Ceremonies for the Soul Wound. Soul wound is an indigenous name. Indigenous leaders have been naming that as what their people faced and what those who were the colonizers also face. We all need to heal from it. So, as I push my way up the steep January hillside, the soil is barely moist. We're in a period of drought, and my soul misses the murky richness of a normal winter. Rock ferns and maidenhair leaf out feebly. I can't bear to see that the manzanitas are not blooming at all this season. Even on their favorite slope, where they are small trees, no sprays of white flowers, no circle of little white bells fallen to earth after bloom, no wintering hummingbirds, no subtle sweet fragrance, no magical touch of faint pink. A whole hillside that should be humming with bees is silent, as if the timing is off, as if this is not winter, not manzanita blooming time in the Napa Hills. These hills were Wapo and Patwin land and still are in my mind. Would the first people have held ceremony for a hillside in trouble? Manzanita was important for the hard wood of digging sticks and the rusty red fruits that dried on the bush and were soaked into cider or Judas candy. Even more, this plant was a relative who took care of them as they took care of it. Ceremony renewed that relationship with healing all around. I long for this relationship, but the culture I was raised in lost its earth-based ceremonies long ago. Being out on the hill, in touch with the energy of this place, has been my way of ceremony. But as things grow difficult and the land shows its wounds, my doubts grow and the healing feels less potent. My friend Janella LaRose from the Shell Mound Walks has often told me, you don't need us to offer prayers. Everyone can do it, and everyone has to. It's your responsibility too. We're in this mess together. Indigenous ways can inspire, but it's time for the rest of us to reach deep into ourselves and our distant past for ceremony and healing. We need to transform the very mind my ancestors passed down. Those ancestors need healing. So do I. So does the land. And so do all who've been harmed. That's it.
Both two very moving readings tonight. I want to give our guests an opportunity to either make a comment or ask a question. So if you raise your hand, and 'cause I don't see that anyone's put a question in the chat. So would anybody like to add to this
Karen,
comment?
we did
Yes?
have one more question. Did you decide we didn't have time for that?
Well, I would like to get the audience involved
Good.
first, and then maybe we
Then
can.
we do the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm up for anything. If it doesn't look like anyone is, I'm trying, oh, there we go. Go ahead and unmute Jim Wilson. There you go.
What is your best advice to heal after fire? Our ranch and house was destroyed, and we're living in Napa now. And for me, after living almost 65 years on the ranch, how do you heal? What advice would you give us? I feel like I have such emptiness at times.
Either author feel compelled to respond? I think we're all sort of speechless.
Right. Well, one thought that comes to me, Leonore, I mean, it's a tremendous loss. I can't imagine what it would be like for me. And having it been threatened, it didn't happen and it may. But I had a friend once that said she had a great loss, and we asked her about it. And she was in her late 80s, 90s, and she said, you know, my life is like a piece of Swiss cheese. It has these holes in it, and they've become a part of my integrity. And I suspect in time, the loss of your home and your ranch will find a way into your sense of self, the integrity of your sense of self. But it's a horrible loss. And anyway.
Thank you.
It is a horrible loss.
I'll buy some Swiss cheese.
Brenda, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
I hear that Brenda, did you have a question?
Yes, I do, but Louise has something to say.
Okay, thank you. Louise?
I would like to say something to that. I am so moved that you were able to tell us about this. and I'm so moved by what you shared. And I thought, how could we give any answer to that? And then something came to me that I was wanting to say on this call anyway. I several weeks ago, I attended a walk that was sponsored by the Land Trust of Napa County called A Walk with Napa's First Peoples. And maybe you went to it last year. This was the second year it was given. There were 3 members of the Wapo tribe, 3 relatives leading this walk. It was the Trancas Crossing, and they took us. We looked at plants, we looked at salmon in the river, tried to look for salmon. There were songs offered. There was a showing of techniques for making baskets and other artifacts. There was the smell of the herbs, of healing herbs, and there were foods from the land that were given to us in our hands: pine nuts, roasted bay nuts, little cups of elderberry juice. They were so delicious. Every taste was delicious. But the reason this story is healing, it might be healing, is I felt such love and caring offered to this group by these people, these 3 Wapo people who are the ones that have been displaced, have lost everything that they loved, and don't have any way to get it back. And I was just it was such a generous thing to do, and it was so beautiful, especially to me, because of the beauty of all of these items that they shared with us. So I don't know if that's a help or anything, but it's just what came up when your question.
Thank you, thank you. Wonderful answer.
Yes, very much. Brenda, go ahead now.
Yes, hi. So I know Louise since spring 2018, and Louise honored my class at UC Berkeley in the spring of 2022, on February 15, I remember the date. And this question is going to be for both authors, Patricia and Louise, but it's linked to my course and to what Louise shared with us in that class. And I remember Louise mentioning shame. My class is about shame, navigating shame, coming to grips with shame, and how Louise felt shame about the history, right, of genocide and what our ancestors, I'm Mexican American, so I know my ancestors also committed genocide against indigenous people. And I was, in part of the class for my students for the second project is something that is going to be consequential in their lives, that doesn't stay in the classroom. Project 1 is also consequential. In my mind, it is consequential. And I would like to hear from both of you how I can get my students connected to the indigenous communities, to maybe, if they feel like doing something hands-on for their final project, and connect with the indigenous community, right? So any advice you can give me or connect me to those communities. I only know Corina Gold, but not personally, for example. So anything that you can give us as an advice.
Well, I'll say something quickly. I think there's it was very fortunate. It took a lot of relationship building, I imagine, for the Land Trust to organize this walk that I just mentioned. This is a precious moment of relationship building, to be able to go on a walk like this. And it's very easy to ask too much of an Indigenous person. to please help my students learn and educate. That's not a good thing. But there are some, I think there are some organizations that are better set up than others to do this. And I would go on the website of the Segorite Land Trust in the East Bay, where you students are. And they have a section on how to approach us respectfully. That's a really good thing to know, how to approach us respectfully, because a lot of people are curious right now, or a lot of people want to learn, but it can be a great burden to have to teach. So I would go to that website and look for that, and there are plenty of volunteer opportunities with Segorite because it's a big organization. So maybe you can find a way to do that. Mm-hmm.
Patricia, did you want to add anything to that? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I've got odd things going on with the electricity and the sound in here.
Yeah.
I think that Louise probably can help you a lot more than I can on this.
Yeah, actually, she had a very good resource. So
Yes.
let's go to Naomi Lewinsky for a question or a comment. Are you there?
Okay, here I am.
Now you're there.
Well, I don't live in Napa, but I have spent wonderful time at Patricia's ranch and know the oaks of which she speaks. I want to just speak for somebody who, as all of us are, is struggling so much with, there's a term, solastalgia, with the sorrow for what's happening to the earth. It's just so moving to hear both of you in your very different ways, but ways that fit together so soulfully. I just thank you for speaking for the earth. And it feels so essential to have people who aren't, to have those of us who are not Indigenous be able to speak for the earth in the way that Patricia and Louise have. And so I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Beth, are you ready to ask your question? Unmute and go for it.
Oh, I was just saying, sorry, my 5-year-old is hanging on me. I sent Brenda a direct message regarding her question.
Oh, good.
So I don't have a burning question, but there is one thing that occurred to me, since you're both kind of you both have written it, the ecocide, genocide, and I'm curious. I don't actually know the answer to this, and it's loosely related, but it's it kind of mirrors the style of the your narratives, right? So looking at ecocide, genocide, but whenever I'm Tewa, that's New Mexico, but whenever I go to any kind of like national gathering or something like that, and I say I'm from California because this is where I was born. I was born in Napa, but everybody always says, "Oh, California, like you guys really got put through the meat grinder," because it's like they came from the east and made their way to the west. So by the time they got to the west, they knew how to do all of those bad things that we need a more contained way to talk about these things. But so they were experts by the time they got to California. So I was thinking, in Napa, you talk about all these meetings you go to, and there's all this fight, and I'm wondering, like, what are their fights on the East Coast? It just got me thinking. It's not really something I don't think you can answer, but it just got me thinking of how you look at the whole picture, and because you both did that, and I'm thinking, like, what are the fights on the East Coast as far as the eco side? But that's more of my brain just going in another direction. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Terry, Are you ready to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And great to see you, Patricia. And Louise, thank you for your book. I just was able to finish Patricia's book before today. And it's interesting because I actually am reading 3 books at the same time. And there are the two others Patricia references in her book. The 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah Smith, Jones, and The Wind in the Willows, which I had never read before. And in your reading, Patricia, you were saying about, we're at this point of a crisis of conscience. And that was absolutely the takeaway I had with your book. And that there was a scene in The Wind of the Willows where you referenced that Mole starts having these little tentacle feelings of he's coming to home. He and Rat have been out in the snowstorm, lost, and they're trying to make their way back home, and it's very frightening. And Mole catches this sense of home. But Rat is so intent on getting to his home that he sort of outpaces Mole, and Mole hangs back and he's like, wait, it's my home. I smell it. I know it's here somewhere. And Rat doesn't realize this is happening and keeps going on. And by the time, and Mole says, oh, well, okay, I'll go to Rat's house. And he tries to catch up. And by the time he does, he's trying to be stoic and say, it's okay, we passed my house. But he can't even hold himself back. He's crying and so distraught. And Rat's like, what in the world? And he says, I know my house is modest and there's not much to it. And yours is so much better. And it's fine, we'll just go to your house. And Rat insists, no, we will go back. And it was so moving to me. And the idea of home is, it doesn't have to be big, that it can be small, modest. And the big takeaway with like the 1619 Project is switching around this idea of what can we get versus what can we give. And I feel like sort of across history, partially the result of rampant capitalism that has convinced us that service, compassion, love, sharing, community are secondary to how big is the house, how big is the car, how many jets do we have, whatever it might be. That we've been convinced that what we consume is what makes our life big. And I felt like with the struggles in your story, the way you wove the children and projects that you did with your grandchildren and the ages with your husband and the land, that there's this shift. There was one scene where you are planting acorns to kind of reforest with the oaks. And it's like, how do we get society to recognize that really the best feelings come from what we can give and how we can have compassion, not how many shoes we have or how fast our car drives. And I've just been swirling in these thoughts of, the healing is going to come from giving, and how to sort of send that to scale, how to scale that. And I think that your book is a way of, and these stories is about how to turn around, not how big is our winery going to be, or how beautiful this wine is, but what can we give to the soil? What can we give to each other? It's just such a moving book. It's really given me this tremendous uplift through the struggle. And I want to compliment you and everybody here for having an interest in how do we turn these things into our attitudes into giving instead of consuming.
Thank you, Terry.
Well,
I have a comment. I probably didn't sign in the right way.
That's okay, go for it. And then we'll probably have to make this our last comment for the night to respect everyone's time. Although I do have one final thing to say to our authors before we go. So go ahead with your last question.
Well, it's not so much a question, but I think it's wonderful that Bookmine has this service and has become such a helpful and fruitful part of our community. And then I haven't had a chance to read both books, but I finished Inherited Silence. And as a history writer myself, I think Louise has done just an amazing job of putting the whole arc of history together, and particularly her family in the Napa Valley. And you answered some questions for me. I'm still working on Tula Cay Cemetery. You may remember that project, but anyway, thank you all very much.
So we had a final question, but I think we'll shelve that for the moment unless you want to answer it in the question I'm about to ask. Both of you invite communities to take action. So there's no better community than the people who've joined us tonight. So give us all some sort of challenge or direction or something to take away, because there is a lot of hope in everything we've discussed tonight, even though it sometimes feels a little hopeless as we enter October, another fire season, and we have one of our authors sitting in the dark.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I heard recently on an NPR interview with a couple who had lost a baby, and just kind of unimaginable loss. And I think, and what they talked about is grief. And I think we're all experiencing grief for the way things were, and we coming into a time that is so different. Our climate is changing, and we don't know how much it's going to change. But what I think it is so important we face our grief. And as he said, it's if you can do it, if you can face the grief, it is a portal. Grief is a portal, and it can open into a very rare kind of love. And I get little glimpses of that sometimes with this. I think it's a lot to bear, the loss. And I think about Leonore and Jim, your loss. And it's just a lot to bear, but it's so important that we do. And we don't know what will happen. We don't know what will happen next then, but I think our connection with each other is incredibly important, and being open to grief opens us to connection.
Louise,
Yeah,
very profound.
I can't agree, couldn't agree more with that part of it, but also want to say that in chapter 9 of my book, you'll learn that if you're related back to any Puritans or have been socialized by a culture that was influenced by my ancestors, my Puritan ancestors, you'll see that they actually thought grief was a sin, and they didn't want us to do it. They thought it was pagan to feel bad about the past. You need to accept God's will and not question it. So it's hard for some people to practice. We don't have grief practices, most of us. I also want to be sure to give Beth a reference about the ecocide in New England, but I don't want to try to do that now, and I don't want to type it into the chat and miss listening to all of you. My main answer to this question is we just need to listen to each other to the indigenous people who still know some ways that we don't know about to take care of the earth. And we have to do it with an awareness of our own residue that we carry as settlers of colonizer mind. I wanted to mention that in Sonoma County, there on Indigenous Peoples Day, there's going to be a group that's been working for several years to put together a settler's apology. And that will be delivered at Santa Rosa Junior College. And I know it and have seen the text, and it's very beautiful. But the main thing is they worked together in ceremony, in discussion, and interaction with Indigenous guides to put this together in a way that decenters whiteness and colonization. So there are also some great projects that I know about in Sonoma County, and I'd like to see some in Napa County starting up. We have some things that we need to call attention to and memorialize. And I'm willing to sit with groups in more intimate situations so we can talk about these things more deeply. And I think Patricia is too. We want some change to come from this 1 hour of conversation, for which thank you, Napa Bookmine.
Oh, thank you. As I said, both books really enlightened me in an embarrassing way. I feel like I'm late to the game, and I would recommend that everyone on the call take the action of recommending both of these books to everyone they know, because everyone who lives in Napa needs to be thinking about what we're doing to protect our land, and also how we need to be grateful and loving to everyone who sacrificed so that we could be here. And thank you all for being here tonight. The links to find the books through our website is in the chat. Come into the store, we have copies there. And thank you so much for supporting these authors and Napa Bookmine by joining us here. And I hope to see all of you again soon. Louise, you have one last?
I just want to mention that on November 10th, I'll be speaking about the ancestors part of my story at the Napa Public Library in person and on Zoom. And Bookmine will be there too. But so if you want to know about what Nathan Coombs might have done to contribute to these things, you can come to that.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here tonight and staying late. It was worth it. Nice to see you all.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Patricia,
Night.
Louise.
It's great to see you.
Yes, it is. And nice to meet you both.
Two of my cousins. Wonderful. 3 actually. Mary Lou is also here.
Peter was with us, Jill, and also Jean.
Jean, my niece.
Jean
Maybe
Galbraith, and Peter. So there are 3 of us. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. It's hard to say goodbye.
yes.
Patricia, we hope your lights come on soon.
Oh, yeah, I do too.
You know, some of the rest of you might be in the dark soon. I hope not.